Sirens cut through the quiet streets of Los Angeles as police cars raced toward a gas station just before dawn. A man lay bleeding on the concrete, shot at close range. Nearby, officers found strange writings, symbols, and notes filled with violent promises. This was not a normal robbery. Investigators quickly realized something far more dangerous was unfolding. The attack was part of a growing terror plan tied to military bases, synagogues, and government buildings across Southern California. And at the center of it all was a group that never should have existed. It was born not overseas, not in secret camps, but inside the walls of a California prison. Before authorities could stop the next strike, they needed to answer one terrifying question. How did this begin behind bars? Years earlier, the story started far away from flashing lights and gunfire. Inside New Folsom Prison, Kevin James was serving time for armed robbery. The prison was cold, tense, and filled with anger. Inmates searched for protection, meaning, and identity. James found his purpose there. He began preaching a strict and violent version of Islam, telling other prisoners that America was evil and that violence was justified. He spoke with confidence and control. Many listened. James created a group he called Jamiyyat Ul-Islam Is-Saheeh, known as JIS. To outsiders, it sounded like a religious study group. Inside prison, it became something else. JIS pushed hate, fear, and extreme beliefs. James taught that attacks on U.S. targets were holy acts. He spoke against Jewish people, the government, and the military. Behind steel doors and concrete walls, the group slowly grew. Prison guards noticed changes, but did not yet understand the danger. James gathered followers in quiet corners of the yard. He tested loyalty with words, not weapons. He promised power to men who felt powerless. Many inmates were young, angry, and lost. JIS gave them a sense of belonging. This was not loud or sudden. It was slow and careful, like a fire burning under the floor. When Kevin James was released from prison, the danger did not end. It followed him outside. He reconnected with former inmates who had joined JIS behind bars. One of them was Levar Washington. Washington had listened closely to James in prison and took the message seriously. After release, Washington became more violent and more committed. On the streets of Los Angeles, JIS began turning words into action. Members carried out armed robberies to raise money. These crimes were not random. The money had a purpose. Authorities later learned that the group wanted to fund attacks. They talked about hitting military facilities, synagogues, and public buildings. The threats were real. The planning was serious. Police did not yet see the full picture. At first, these crimes looked like gang activity, but something felt different. Witnesses described strange behavior and extreme beliefs. Notes found at crime scenes showed hatred and violent ideas. Slowly, law enforcement connected the dots. Then came the gas station shooting. That moment changed everything. Investigators tied the attack directly to JIS. They uncovered lists of possible targets. They found evidence that the group wanted to cause mass fear. This was no longer just a criminal gang. It was a domestic terror cell. Federal agents stepped in. Surveillance increased. Phones were monitored. Meetings were tracked. Authorities learned that Kevin James, even after prison, remained the spiritual leader. His words still guided the group. The prison-born ideology had survived and grown stronger outside. As arrests began, the truth shocked the public. JIS did not form in secret camps or foreign countries. It formed in a U.S. prison, under the eyes of the system meant to stop crime. Prosecutors described it as a warning sign of how dangerous prison radicalization could be. Kevin James and his followers were charged with terrorism-related crimes. The courtroom was tense. Evidence showed how the group started behind bars and moved toward real-world violence. Jurors listened as prosecutors explained how ideas planted in prison nearly turned into deadly attacks. But even as convictions were handed down, one question remained unanswered. How many others had heard the same message inside prison walls? And were there more groups like JIS still hidden in the shadows?
As the judge prepared to speak and the courtroom fell silent, investigators worried about what they might have missed. Because if one terror cell could be born inside Folsom prison, there was no guarantee it would be the last. And just as the sentence was about to be read, new intelligence arrived that would change everything, pointing to another threat still unfolding beyond the prison gates. The courtroom was silent when the verdicts were read, but outside those walls, fear was still alive. Investigators were not celebrating. Instead, they were asking a harder question. If JIS had started inside one prison, could the same thing be happening in others? The arrests stopped the attacks, but they did not erase the ideas. Those ideas were still alive, carried in minds shaped behind bars. And law enforcement knew the story of JIS was not over yet. To understand how close the danger came, agents went back to the beginning. They rebuilt the timeline piece by piece. Inside New Folsom Prison, Kevin James had learned how to survive prison life. He watched how gangs worked. He saw how leaders gained loyalty. James copied those methods and replaced gang rules with extremist beliefs. He used religion as a shield and a weapon at the same time. James demanded strict obedience. Members had to follow rules, attend lessons, and accept his views without question. He taught that violence was a duty. He told inmates that the United States was at war with Islam. These lessons were repeated again and again until they felt normal. In prison, where men searched for meaning, the message spread quietly. After release, Levar Washington became the most active member. He was angry, unstable, and deeply radicalized. Police later said Washington was willing to die for the cause. In 2005, his actions proved it. He carried out a violent shooting at a gas station, killing an innocent man. The killing was meant to raise money for JIS. It also showed how far the group was willing to go. That murder forced authorities to move fast. Federal agents launched a full counterterrorism investigation. They uncovered maps, target lists, and notes filled with hate. JIS planned attacks on synagogues, Israeli diplomatic sites, and military facilities. The plans were not random. They were focused and deliberate. Kevin James, even while under watch, continued spreading his ideology. Investigators recorded conversations where James spoke about attacking American targets. He never held a weapon himself, but his influence was clear. Prosecutors later described him as the brain behind the operation. The prison-born leader had turned words into weapons. During the trial, jurors learned how close Southern California came to mass violence. Experts testified about prison radicalization. They explained how extremist groups use isolation, fear, and anger to recruit. The courtroom heard how prisons can become breeding grounds if warning signs are missed. Kevin James was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Levar Washington received the death penalty. Other members were given long federal sentences. The JIS cell was destroyed, but officials warned that the threat of prison radicalization remained. Behind prison walls, changes began. Guards received new training. Intelligence units increased monitoring of extremist behavior. Religious programs were reviewed more carefully. Authorities worked to separate violent ideology from lawful religious practice. The goal was prevention, not punishment alone. Still, concerns remained. Investigators found that JIS members had tried to contact others outside prison even after arrests. Some messages were stopped. Others raised alarms too late. The case forced the nation to face an uncomfortable truth. Terrorism does not always come from outside the country. Sometimes it grows quietly inside. Families of potential targets later learned how close they had come to tragedy. Synagogues increased security. Military bases reviewed threat plans. The public never saw the attacks because they never happened, but they almost did. As years passed, the JIS case became a warning taught in law enforcement training.
It showed how ideology can survive prison walls. It showed how one man's beliefs could shape many others, and it raised fears about what might still be hidden. Then, during a routine prison intelligence review years later, analysts found something troubling. A report referenced new extremist conversations using the same language Kevin James once used. The phrases were familiar, the structure was similar, and the location was another U.S. prison. As agents leaned closer to the screen, one thought echoed through the room. Was history repeating itself? And had the lessons of JIS truly been learned? The warning signs were small, but they were impossible to ignore. Inside another U.S. prison, officers noticed inmates using the same phrases Kevin James once used at Folsom. The words sounded calm, almost peaceful, but investigators knew better now. They had learned from JIS that dangerous ideas do not always sound violent at first. Sometimes they sound like guidance, purpose, and faith. That was what made them so powerful. Federal agents reopened old files from the JIS case. They studied every detail again. They listened to recorded conversations. They reread letters written by Kevin James from prison. The pattern was clear. Radicalization did not happen overnight. It happened slowly, step by step. A conversation in the yard, a lesson in a cell, a promise of belonging. JIS had proven that prison walls could not stop ideas from spreading. Kevin James was now locked away for life, but his influence had not fully disappeared. Prison officials tightened controls. Known extremists were separated. Mail was screened more carefully. Group gatherings were watched closely. These changes worked, but they also showed how close the system had come to failing before. Experts explained that prison is a place where people feel broken. Many inmates feel forgotten by the world. Groups like JIS look for those people. They offer answers to pain. They turn anger into purpose. For some inmates, that message becomes stronger than the law. Families of the victims from the gas station shooting still lived with the pain. They knew the attack was not random. It was part of something bigger. In court statements, prosecutors reminded the public that JIS wanted mass violence. They wanted fear. They wanted attention. The only reason it didn't happen is because law enforcement stepped in just in time.
Across California, police departments reviewed the case again. Training sessions used JIS as an example of what to watch for. Officers learned how to spot early signs of extremist thinking. Prison staff learned how important their role was. A missed warning could mean lives lost outside the prison gates. Years later, the story of JIS remained one of the most disturbing examples of domestic terrorism in America, not because of how many people were killed, but because of how close the country came to something far worse. A terror cell born inside a prison had nearly reached the streets. Kevin James still sits in a high-security prison. His words are monitored. His movements are controlled. But the case changed how America thinks about prisons and terrorism. It forced officials to accept a hard truth. Locking someone up does not always stop the danger. Sometimes it changes its shape. The public rarely hears about attacks that never happened. They only see the aftermath when it is too late. JIS reminds us that some of the most dangerous threats are stopped quietly, behind the scenes, before the world ever knows. As one investigator later said, prisons are meant to hold criminals, not create new ones. The JIS case showed what can happen when that line is crossed. And even today, as guards walk prison corridors and inmates whisper in corners, one lesson remains clear. The birth of JIS inside Folsom Prison was not just a story from the past. It is a warning for the future, because the next dangerous idea does not announce itself with gunfire. It begins with words, and the question still hangs in the air, unanswered. Who is listening now? The final warning came quietly, not with sirens or gunfire, but with paperwork. A sealed intelligence memo moved across a federal desk late one night. It confirmed what many investigators had feared for years. Prison radicalization was not a rare accident. It was a repeating risk.
The memo referenced the JIS case again, calling it a turning point in how America understood terrorism inside its own prisons. The story that began at Folsom had permanently changed the system. Inside correctional facilities across the country, new rules were now in place. Officers were trained to recognize extremist language, coded phrases, and sudden shifts in behavior. Religious leaders were vetted more carefully. Intelligence teams worked quietly behind the scenes. None of this was visible to the public, but all of it traced back to one group, Jamiyyat Ul-Islam Is-Saheeh. Kevin James was no longer a name in the news. He was a file number, locked away in permanent isolation. His days were silent and controlled. He no longer spoke to followers. He no longer preached in prison yards, but his legacy lived on in training manuals, court transcripts, and law enforcement briefings. He became a case study of how one man's ideas nearly caused mass bloodshed. For the families who almost became victims, the fear never fully faded. Synagogues that appeared on JIS target lists still remember how close the danger came. Military facilities that were once watched by the group quietly improved their defenses. The attacks never happened, but the threat was real enough to leave scars. Years later, experts agreed on one thing: JIS was stopped just in time. If law enforcement had waited longer, Southern California might have faced one of the deadliest domestic terror attacks in its history. The cell had moneyed plans, weapons access, and loyal members willing to kill. All of it started with words spoken inside a prison. The case also forced a difficult national conversation. Prisons are meant to protect society, but they can also become places where dangerous ideas grow if left unchecked. JIS proved that terrorism does not always cross borders. Sometimes it grows quietly behind concrete walls, hidden in plain sight. Today, the story of JIS is rarely told in full. It does not have massive explosions or famous attack footage. Instead, it tells a more unsettling truth. Some of the most serious threats are the ones that never make headlines because they are stopped in silence. As the final files were archived and the case officially closed, one senior agent wrote a simple note in the margin: "This threat was prevented, not eliminated." That sentence still echoes through prison corridors and intelligence offices across the country. Because the birth of JIS inside Folsom Prison was not just the end of one terror cell. It was a reminder that danger does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it is already locked inside. The story of JIS did not end with arrests or life sentences. It ended with a warning that some of the most dangerous threats do not arrive from distant lands or loud explosions. They begin quietly behind locked doors, where anger meets influence and words turn into weapons. Folsom Prison held the men, but it could not hold the ideas. Those ideas nearly escaped into the streets, targeting innocent people who never knew how close they came to disaster. JIS reminds us that justice is not only about punishment, it is about awareness, prevention, and the courage to see danger before it shows its face. As the lights go out in prison corridors tonight, one question remains: how many other ideas are forming in silence, waiting for the wrong moment to be heard?